Hearthstone just had some insane nerfs and some insane buffs, which means these are the decks you should be playing post-patch. Every single deck in this video has a deck code associated with it in the description down below, and while you're there, make sure you subscribe. I'm almost at 100,000 subs. Before we get to the actual decks, I just want to talk about Warrior and Paladin. Warrior got a bunch of buffs to their Enrage Warrior package, but the problem is that none of these buffs really help the deck. It still has the fundamental issues, and unless they make some of these cards, unless they make this like a 1-mana card, I have a feeling that Enrage Warrior just won't really see any play. This card was the sole reason why Enrage Warrior was very good in the Ashes of Outlands metagame. It made the deck proactive and it helped you get back on board. What are your thoughts of bringing Risky Skipper into the core set so Enrage Warrior just isn't absolutely garbage? Paladin, on the other hand, got some buffs, but overall it feels like Paladin's biggest problem is that they're trying to push Dude Paladin, and Dude Paladin never really is that good because it's an incremental advantage. And if you're not mana cheating in Hearthstone, are you really even playing the game? But I also have a feeling that Paladin's not going to be super great until maybe the mini set, which is unfortunate. Let's start off with a deck that got hit pretty hard. Vile Library got nerfed, so it no longer gives an extra +1/+1. It only gives you +1/+1 for each imp you control. That may not seem like an absolute big deal, but in the early game, the difference of +1/+1 can be pretty relevant. The deck is still obviously not that bad. There are still a bunch of ways for you to high roll, but it seems like the way you want to build this deck now is more with the Sire Denathrius package, so you can actually win games when your opponent deals with your early game imps. Generally speaking, Mischievous Imp is obviously still very powerful. Keeping Imp King Rafam in your opening hand seems like it's a great way to win, but it does seem like Imp Warlock is not nearly as strong as it used to be because of one of the decks that got buffed. Miracle Rogue got some insane buffs this patch, but no buff was greater than the Edwin buff from 4 mana to 3 mana. And Edwin did lose 1 attack and 1 health. Majority of the time that will not make a single difference because Edwin's probably still gonna kill you. Edwin can be played a turn earlier, have an additional mana for you to have later in the game to get some more draws to make him even stronger. And if you did not know, if you play him and then shadow step him, he keeps the buff in his hands, which means that you have a 1-cost Edwin, which is it's pretty good. But the other real reason you want to play this deck is how much it actually punishes decks like Imp Warlock because of the Wild Paw Knoll, the backstab, and a bunch of way to cheat mana in the early game. It's very efficient at getting the board and then keeping the board and then killing your opponent with burn from hand, like cards like Wicked Stab or the Necrolord Draka. This is probably going to be the deck you're going to be seeing most on ladder. Enjoy the rogue meta. Big Spell Mage got an indirect buff this patch as well. More of the decks are playing for board, which means just constantly freezing your opponents or just dealing with the board is very, very powerful. It also turns out Rune of the Archmage is still a pretty great card. Dragonfire Amulet getting cheated by Belinda can just be game winning on its own. And the deck has so many ways to cheat mana using cards like Great Sage Parrot or even stealing your opponent's win condition like Sire Denathrius just to win a game. It also has Magister Dawn's Grasp, which is a very powerful card in the current metagame. Another deck that kind of got indirectly buffed was Quest Hunter. Please don't play it or I will absolutely hate you, but I can't ignore how good the deck is in the actual format. Because you're running 40 cards, there are just so many ways to refresh your hero power after you actually get the quest line completed. You also have 40 life, so you don't really die to aggro decks as often, and there's just so many ways to kill your opponent with this deck. It's absolutely ridiculous, and the Dormant Wild Seeds can be the difference of you winning or losing a game. And this deck is also really good against Big Spell Mage because Big Spell Mage wants to kill early game minions, and you don't really do that because you're just here to use your hero power. You could punish a mage quite a bit. Please, for all of us on ladder, don't play it. Thank you to Firestone for sponsoring this video. If you want to level up your Hearthstone game, make sure you're using Firestone. Firestone helps you keep track of your deck, what's in it, what you've played, and what's in your hand. Firestone also keeps track of what your opponent has played, what potential secrets they could have, and so much more information that will help you win more. Firestone also keeps track of every single game you played, and you can also watch each individual replay to see what exactly went wrong and how you won or lost the game. Firestone also keeps track of your entire collection to let you know how much of each set you've actually completed. It also lets you know how many packs you opened over the years in case you were curious how many classic packs you've actually ended up opening. There is a bunch of achievements that you can go for in Firestone to show off to all your friends. Firestone is the perfect companion to have while playing Hearthstone, so make sure you download it with the link in the description. One of the decks that has been good since the start of the expansion but doesn't really see a whole lot of play is Naga Priest. The main point of this deck is to play Nagas, play Serpent Wigs on your Nagas, and kill them with cards like Bless. You also have Pelagos, which can can be very, very good with a Serpent Wig, and you can generate a ton of stats with this deck. The only real problem with it is that it's kind of linear and not super fun to play for most people. It's definitely flying under the radar at the moment. To everyone's surprise, Guff is still not nerfed, which means Druid is in a pretty great state overall. It's still doing the exact same thing it was doing in the previous meta game, but now it basically has to fight against rogues more often than Warlock. You obviously have a ton of way to ramp in this deck, cards like Wild Growth, Widow Bloom Seedsman. You have a ton of way to get some life with cards like Earthen Scales, but most importantly, this deck is just really, really good overall. It has a great win condition against slower decks, fight against early game minions using cards like Thorngrove Sentries just to make sure you don't die. And because we are running Prince Renathal in the deck, the extra 10 life can be the difference of you losing or winning against an aggressive deck. Druid is pretty great. Now, Shaman did end up getting a pretty big nerf with Snowfall Guardian. The fact that it no longer gains stats for each minion that is frozen is a pretty big deal, but that's the only real thing Shaman got hit with, which means the rest of the deck is still pretty great. Shaman is really good with Sire Denathrius because it can generate so many tokens. The Evolve package is still really powerful in the deck, and just overall, Shaman's probably going to still be pretty great in the metagame. Maybe Miracle Rogue can get under it a little bit more because of the burst potential with Edwin. I do think that a lot of people will sleep on Shaman for a little bit, only to realize that the deck is still pretty great. I don't know. I feel like there's always this common misconception of when something gets nerfed, people just think the class is absolutely dead. But if only one card is affected, I'm pretty sure Shaman's going to be in a pretty great spot still. I would highly recommend using Control Shaman if you've already built the deck. It's still going to be great. Rogue might be somewhat of an issue, but for the most part, against a lot of the decks, you should be in a pretty great spot. From the decks that actually got a buff, Relic Demon Hunter seems to be doing okay, way better than the Paladin and Warrior buffs, because Relic Vault for 2 mana was a pretty great game changer for this archetype. The ability to play this on 2 and then curve into your 3 mana Relic is a very big deal. It not only sets you up for a better mid game, but also for an insane late game with your Artificer. This deck is also running the Sire Denathrius just for more late game power. There comes a point where you might be able to draw your Sire with the Relic of Dimensions, which means that you get a pretty cheap Sire Denathrius. Now, I don't think Demon Hunter is like a top tier deck, but it is actually playable now, and that's the most important. Here is the data so far for the patch. We can see Big Spell Mage, Quest Hunter, and Naga Priest, as well as Mind Rogue are tier 1, a bunch of decks in tier 2 that will probably get optimized as the meta develops. We then go to tier 3, which we see Thief Rogue, Hand Buff Paladin, and Curse Warlock kind of suffering. And then in tier 4, it looks like it's just as it was in the previous patch, with a bunch of decks doing absolutely garbage. Paladin is probably hopeless at the moment. Unfortunately for Warrior, and Rage Warrior just isn't it at the moment. They need another card to make the archetype good. And then Demon Hunter is picking up some steam, but overall that is the post-patch meta so far. Every single one of these deck codes will be in the description, and you should subscribe because I'm almost at 100,000 subs. Let me know if you found a hidden gem in the metagame, and I'll see you in the next one.